Today, I took every single brawler and put them up against the IKE turret in a 1v1 style fight. Here's how it went. We started off with Shelly, who was able to get her best gadget and star power as well as her finest skin, but no damage or shield gear because that's just too much annoying math. Shelly still gets to blast the IKE turret with her clay pigeon shots and get a close range hyper super, but she only does about 20,000 damage per rush, making her take 3 rushes and scoring 22nd place. Nita gets a hypercharged hyper bear with faux fur, which tanks a huge amount of IKE's attacks. It also deals some pretty solid damage, and her first rush did well over half of the IKE's health, allowing her to beat the turret in 2 attempts, putting her in the top 10. Even though Colt can outrange the IKE turret, he has to step into the danger zone to attack. Luckily though, he still manages to finish the task in exactly 3 attempts, getting 36th place. Bull is pretty much just meant for this challenge, as his hypercharge allows him to get to the IKE turret at almost full health, and then with the help of the rest of his abilities, he finishes the task in just 2 dives, putting him in the top 10. Brock has very limited time to unload all of his attacks, and I realized he's pretty much just best off spamming his rockets at the IKE. I mean, it does do 38% each time, so it's still certainly a decent approach. He of course took 3 attempts and landed in 34th place. El Primo comes in out of nowhere, and he's able to bring forth 2 meteors before the IKE turret takes him down. He just barely takes away half of the turret's health, which enables him to complete the task in just 2 attempts. This got him in 13th place. Barley doesn't do as bad as you'd expect. He tosses some herbal tonic on the ground and then steps into range, throwing 3 attacks and a hyper super before being taken down, and they do around 20,000 damage. Barley is able to kill the IKE in 3 rushes, but the 3rd one still does take him down, leaving him in 32nd place. If you ask me, Poco actually does a lot better than I had expected. His combination of heals stack with his mediocre attacks, and this enables him to actually do a bit over 20% of the IKE's health. Sadly though, he runs out of gadgets after 4 attempts, and this means that his 5th attempt leaves a little bit of health left on the IKE. This puts him in 73rd place. Rosa performs a bit worse than you'd think, mostly because she has to manually approach the IKE turret unlike most of the other tanks. She does a really good job at surviving its attacks, but she still is underwhelming with her attack, and she ends up taking 4 rushes. This puts her in 54th place overall. Jessie has a very strong hyper turret, which she places in front of herself while using the recoil spring gadget. Then she stands directly behind it, using energized shots to heal her turret and damage the IKE. She barely struggles to bring the IKE down and places in the top 10. Dynamite completely nukes the IKE with his hyper super, and as he approaches, he will unfortunately miss all of the fidget spinner shots. Satchel Charge doesn't stun the IKE long enough to give him another attack, but he ends up in 16th place. Tick allows his hyperhead to get as close as possible before launching a ton of mines. Then, he has to wait till he respawns for all of them to blow up. He ends the IKE after 2 rounds of this, and it puts him in 12th place overall. 8-Bit is our iconic damage dealer, safe destroyer, and now today, IKE turret dive specialist. His first dive does 40,000 damage on the dot, and his second dive was fast enough to make the top 10. Rico was good against the heist safe, but suddenly he's a lot worse at a base that actually fights back. He has high damage, but he is taken down before he can get too close, and it makes him take 3 full rushes, landing him in 39th place. Daryl is able to carefully roll onto the safe and unload some ammo, and then hit the safe twice with the second roll before unleashing the remainder of his attacks before being taken down. Ultimately, he is able to delete the safe before his second rush is ended, scoring in the top 10. Penny continues the pirate streak of being a good trio at this by allowing her cannon to both protect and attack, while Penny gets close enough to spam a few coin blasting attacks. She barely struggles to do this rush in 2 attempts, landing her as well in the top 10. Carl has a pretty straightforward approach where he's best off setting the IKE turret on fire and then approaching it with an active super. He does exactly 1/3 of the IKE's health, and as you can imagine, this takes him exactly 3 rushes to finish the job. 37th place. Jackie, however, doesn't stand as much a chance as the others do. She has no choice but to get to the IKE by running, and luckily for her, she does get to do enough damage with Counter Crush to lower her total attempts down to 5. But 5 is still a pretty long time for this challenge especially, and as a result, Jackie gets 71st place. Gus is put into a really crummy spot though. His spirit meter doesn't charge up when hitting the IKE, and neither of his gadgets have any use, so he essentially has to just rush in, dive after dive, doing low damage to the IKE until it's gone. Because of this, Gus gets 79th place. Bo performs well, largely thanks to his mines. They alone do almost 9,000 damage, and that added to whatever he can deliver with his bow, let him finish near the start of his third rush, which lands him a spot in 18th place. Em's attacks do pretty nice damage, but she doesn't last long enough for her super to do any real damage to the turret. She ends up having to go into her 4th dive, and she places 41st out of the 86 brawlers. Stu spams his supers toward the turret, healing with each use, and once he gets to the middle, he drops a gadget and then spams some attacks. It's not that much damage, but it's the best he can do. He finishes the Ike during his 5th rush, and he got 61st place. Piper never got to use her deadly super, but instead, she stood at the edge of the Ike range and fired off some snipes. Luckily for her, she was still able to be far enough to do the maximum damage. She got 57th place. Pam was super tanky, and on top of that, she got one of the best healing abilities there is. She slowly but surely brings down the Ike before her second trial ends. Even though it got a lot of attacks on her, she still scored in the top 10. Frank has mediocre damage, but more importantly for today, he has the highest health. Because of this, he's able to step forth into the Ike's range and hit it with a series of different attacks, destroying the turret before his 3rd dive is over. He gets 28th place. BB's hyper super has to come in at a funny angle in order to hit the Ike twice, and after that she storms forward and swings as many times as possible before being taken down. She's able to do about 15,000 damage per dive, but unfortunately that means that she takes 4 dives to complete the task. She gets 42nd place. B has to have one of the most unpleasant rushes out of all brawlers. Having 1 ammo limits her extremely, and even though she has a gadget and I guess that super, she had to take 7 rushes to bring down the Ike. This put her in 81st place. Sorry that looks so bad, here's this to make you feel better. Nanny obviously won't get any time to use her super, but that doesn't really matter since her 3 hyper attacks do huge damage to the Ike turret. She repeats this 3 times and don't look, she took 3 rushes and got 38th place. Edgar's inability to heal off of the punches he lands on the Ike turret make him feel pretty useless. So useless that he in fact has to take his 4th rush on the turret to fully bring it down. He got 48th place out of the 86 brawlers. Griff is really deadly up close, but that's the problem. Most of these dives aren't really up close, so Griff has to just barely use his 4th dive to finish the Ike off, and this puts him in 40th place. Interestingly enough, Grom is probably one of the best brawlers at attacking the mini Ike turret, but he attained that status because he completely outranges it. Today he has to act like he's a random on your team if you don't use Kojimbo and stand within its range and die. Because of that, he gets 56th place. Bonnie has it kind of weird because she has to wait for her attack to land before she launches into Bonnie form, because otherwise the tooth flying through the air will just disappear. Anyways, she actually brings the Ike down during her 3rd dive, landing her in 24th place. Gale honestly sucks at this. His Cold Snow and even colder super doesn't really seem like it was meant to do all that much damage, and he ends up taking 5 rushes to eliminate the base, and this puts him in 66th place. Our reigning champion Colette is able to charge forth with a hyper super and do most of the Ike's health then and there, and of course finish it off in her 2nd attempt. Without much of a struggle, she's in the top 10. Belle's mark doesn't work on the Ike turret. You know what that means? She doesn't use code Jimbo. So if you want to be good at the game, unlike Belle, use code Jimbo. Oh, she took like 6 rushes and she got 76th place. Ash is lucky I'm nice because I gave him some rage to use for his trial. Even with this though, he still dug into his 4th attempt to fully take down the Ike, and this had him end up in 51st place. Lola sacrifices her ego first in order to maximize output here. She still, however, takes 3 even attempts to bring down the Ike turret, and this puts her in 23rd place out of the 86 brawlers. Sam had it weird because I feel like it was in his best interest to retrieve his knucklebusters before punching again. Regardless, he did 13,000 damage per dive, letting him finish the job at mediocre speed, getting 53rd place. Mandy is perhaps the most unlucky of all. Everything she has outranges the Ike turret, but she had to step into the range to attack, and she could only get a super and 2 attacks off before being destroyed. She took 5 rushes and landed in 70th place. Maisie has a deadly hyper super up close, but she was never able to make it all the way to the turret. Because of that, it was best for her to keep her distance while she spammed her attacks for each of her rushes. 21st place. Hank is honestly the greatest. Thanks to the shield of his gadgets and insane damage of his super, he was able to bring down the Ike in 2 rushes, which leaves him in a very good standing. His heroic and milky efforts landed him in the top 10 leaderboard. Love you, Hank. This was not easy, by the way. Pearl cooks. Literally. I mean, not that good since she still has to use her third attempt, but she still does pretty high damage, and when she does finish the job, she ends up in 19th place. Larry sacrifices Lori this time, and the twins unload all sorts of damage into the Ike before being torn apart, but they still had around 15,000 damage per dive. With that, they do manage to bring down the Ike during their fourth attempt, and this puts them in 46th place. Angelo is probably not meant for this challenge, as he really wasn't able to do that much with each rush. His charged shot does pretty decent damage, but after that he has to go connect to the Ike before he is taken out. He still takes a bit into his fifth rush, and this puts him in 67th place. Barry's gadget that doubles his attack's duration is probably the MVP here. Even though he's a horse, he dies pretty quickly, and this makes him take 3 rushes. He gets 33rd place. Shade is really just not meant for this challenge. Even with his gadget, he is limited to 3 attacks before being taken down, and this results in him taking 6 attempts to finish the job. He gets 74th place. Mortis has to dash forth and slowly reach the Ike just to basically get killed by it. He can't do more than 12,000 damage per rush, meaning that he must take 5 rushes to bring down the Ike, and this lands the creature of the night in 64th place. Hera's little spears may not be that good at making it to the Ike before getting their face blasted off, but they sure as heck protect her pretty well. She's able to get all close to the Ike and almost do 15,000 damage, but that just means that she has to use her 4th dive to complete the task. 47th place. Gene only has his attack to do some damage, and let's face it, that thing sucks. But he does get a vengeful spirit with all of his dives, at least until he runs out of gadgets, but in the end, he takes a bit into his 6th dive to win, and this puts him in 78th place. Max got all sorts of weird rules, but I tried my best to apply her gadgets here. I'll give her some credit, she did decent, but she still took long enough to end up in 43rd place. Mr. P's porters and base really kept him alive for some time. Thanks to this, he was able to do almost 20,000 damage per dive, and he finished the Ike during his 3rd dive. Mr. P got 27th place. Sprout's Hyper Super pretty much carried him through this. Although he couldn't live long enough to get a second one on the ground by the Ike, the one that he did land did well over half of the base's health. Sprout then, of course, finished in 2 dives and got 14th place. Byron was never able to splash both himself and the Ike with his super, so he kinda just dumped it as he entered the zone, as well as a few attacks. But Mr. Snake Oil Salesman is just a support brawler, and he takes 7 rushes to kill the Ike. This put him in 82nd place. Squeak's Hyper Super does some heavy duty work on the Ike turret. He came impressively close to doing it in one go, but he finished it on his 2nd try, and this got him 11th place. Lou cannot freeze the Ike turret. If he could, we would probably see him do so much better, but since we can't, we have to watch him struggle and take 5 dives to finish, and this puts him in 58th place. Ruffs cannot use the Sandbags gadget since the Ike just doesn't target them. So instead, he runs in guns blazing and fires all of his offense really quickly, doing around 18,000 damage per rush. This puts Ruffs in 35th place. With Buzz's Hyper Super, he can charge in and stun the turret for a moment and get off 4 attacks before being defeated. These attacks are able to do a third of the Ike's health, and after he's done, Buzz gets 25th place. Banks' popcorn from his gadget and his Hyper Super are really difficult to hit the Ike turret with. However, the foot still kinda does the talking for him because it enables him to destroy the base in 4 rushes, but this puts him in 45th place. Eve did surprisingly good relative to my expectations of her. She was able to be partially tanked by the hatchlings while providing a pretty decent offense, and all of this allowed her to do the job within 4 rushes, and it put her in 50th place. Janet has nothing special going for her. This was my first and only attempt with her, and we just rolled with it. Her super may or may not hit the target, but in general, she's probably looking at 5 rushes to fully bring down the Ike. She gets 68th place. Otis silencing the Ike turret was a powerful move for him. It remains fully silenced for the duration of his super, and all in all, he was almost able to finish the turret after his 2nd rush, and this left him in 17th place. Buster took perhaps the largest turn for the worse that we've seen today. He has nothing to help him except for his close range attack, and by the time he makes it to the Ike to hit it 3 times, he's already waiting to respawn. He repeated this 8 times, and this put him in 84th place, which is still somehow 3rd to last. Gray's grand pianos aren't as deadly as they look. Even after 4 waves of making those things fall on the Ike turret, it's still standing. After this, Gray took another 2 attempts to finish the task, and he got 75th place. RT is one of the greatest damage dealers ever, but not for this mode. He can't mark the Ike, and he can't really get there that easily either. After enough trial and error, we realized that he's basically best off dive bombing and dying to the turret while dealing small damage. The worst part? He can't even beat it in the duration of one match. This is more disappointing than a Mortis in Brawl Ball. Willow has nothing else to do besides charge forward and spam her attacks and super. Although the super doesn't control the Ike or anything, it still does 1500 damage. With enough repetition, Willow broke the Ike in 6 rushes, placing 80th. Doug ate his own hot dog and then ran forward to the cannon and hit it as many times as possible before he fell. And I'll tell you what, he's one heck of a tanky tank. He finished the job during his 3rd rush, and this put him in 31st place. Chuck relies primarily on movement, as that's his greatest source of damage. Obviously, I allowed him to have a prepared set of posts because I can't imagine the comments we'd receive if I did otherwise, so he was able to do relatively promising damage each rush. He got 49th place. Charlie wasn't able to put the Ike in a cocoon, but she was still able to scare it with a bunch of creepy spiders. But a presumably military-grade cannon wearing a construction hat is a lot better than a freaking yo-yo, so Charlie ended up in 65th place. Miko tried his best, but he didn't really succeed. Since he can't reload to save his life, he was unable to do half of the damage in one rush, and this ended up making him place 15th, which is still amazing, but he could have definitely done better. This is not the mode for Melody. Sorry. She basically just ran in and died like a random and gem grab, and I mean, she eventually brought it down during her 7th rush. She got 83rd place. Lily was doing pretty okay until she ran out of gadgets. After that, she couldn't super into the middle, and she had to just run. Suddenly, she ends up having to take 6 dives to finish the Ike, and this put her in 77th place. Clancy is so good at doing damage, but he just doesn't survive long enough to even get close. After enough practice, this was the dive I ended up keeping, which leaves Clancy taking 4 attempts to finish. Unfortunately, he ends up in 44th place. And here's this, I know you wanted to see it. Mo surprisingly does awful at this. Even though he starts off on top of the Ike, it delivers fast damage that brings him down around the time that he deals 10,000 damage himself. As a result, Mo takes 5 burrows to win, and he ends up in 62nd place. Juju's not broken, is she? Her, as well as Gris, pronounced Gregory, I hope you loved that pronunciation, have a ton of health, and they were able to fight the Ike for a while before being taken down. Averaging around 18,000 damage per dive, they landed in 29th place. Spike honestly could probably do that weird thing where all of his spikes hit the Ike, but I couldn't manage to do it in like 30 attempts, so I obviously gave up. Here's a decent spike run. He did it fast enough to get 20th place. As much as I wanted to, I could not set up Crow in a way that he could one-shot the Ike. He just isn't strong enough, I guess. He clearly did good anyways. Top 10. Leon is able to get his clone to tank a few shots for him while constantly healing with his Hyper Super. Miraculously, he does complete the task before he finishes his 3rd dive, and this puts Leon in 30th place. For Sandy, he's actually better off using his healing abilities because in the end, it allows him to get a few more attacks off with each dive. While he sleeps, he not only regenerates his health, but he also reloads some ammo. This makes a pretty nice impact on Sandy even though he's toward the bottom of the group. Sandy takes roughly 4 dives and places 55th overall. Amber is probably the hottest brawler in today's challenge, but that just doesn't cut it. Through each trial, she failed to do a quarter of the Ike's health, meaning that she has to use her 5th attempt to finish the turret. This ends up putting her in 59th place. Meg basically gets to just run towards the Ike as fast as possible to get a boom from heavy metal and of course her super arm impact on the base. Amazingly enough, she blows it away just as she finishes her 4th mag, and this lands her in 52nd place. Surge has too long of a range to do that fancy split thing, which is really weird to think about, so he just ends up running in and wasting all of his ammo before dying. 5 times. He got 69th place. Chester was sometimes able to do a quarter of the Ike's health, but that was mostly dependent on his gadgets buff drawn. I didn't have that much time, so I just left this trial as the final one. 63rd place. Cordelius just barely gets his 3rd shot off before being murdered by the Ike turret. That thing's not going into the Shadow Realm anyways, so Cordelius takes 5 dives to beat the challenge, and this puts him in 60th place. Even though Kit is clearly a great option on Heist, that is not the case for Siege or Demon Siege or whatever these modes are called anymore. Anyways, Kit should chill out with his ego for a bit because he took 9 dives to destroy the Ike, and that puts him in 85th place. That's second to last. Draco has a very careful positioning where he initially hits the Ike with a marking shot at critical range. Immediately after, he turns into his super form and unleashes all of his attacks on the Ike, activating his gadget right before being taken down. Unfortunately, he cannot do it in 2 dives, but he still does pretty well, landing 26th place overall. Finally, we have Kenji, who can't heal himself by damaging the Ike. This really hurts his performance, and he ends up having to use an even 5 dives on the Ike before taking it down, but that just goes and puts him in 72nd place. Anyways, there you have it. Here's the top 10 brawlers for this challenge, and of course your channel members. Thank you everyone, I'll see you next time.